Arcane is just weird. Alright, let me explain. I recently ran a poll, and the majority of players agreed the most bizarrely built stat is Arcane. In fact, there are two stats that climb to the top. Arcane and Dexterity. Arcane making it over 50% of the votes, combining with Dexterity, you get over 80% of the votes, and I believe these results are entirely correlated. So let's talk about it, and why does Arcane rank so high on this list? And for that, I believe there are 4 reasons. The overall niche and confusion with Dexterity, the effect Arcane has on status effects, its incantations and spellcasting as a whole, and the overall theme. While status effects may seem like the most important category to cover, as it is the main selling point of an Arcane build, I would like to go over its confusion with Dexterity and the overall niche first. Despite a lot of popular belief, especially among new players, fast attacking, applying bleed, poison, and other effects are typically Arcane and not Dexterity. Now, I'm not saying Dex cannot shine in these categories, because it absolutely does, but it works much better on Arcane builds than it does on Dex. A good example of this is the Uchigatana. If you are looking for a standard stat investment, Keen, you're going to hit probably about 595 AR with a Uchigatana, with 45 blood loss and 85 if you include Blood Flame Blade. Occult, on the other hand, is going to get you a 603, which is a higher AR with 88 blood loss, and 118 with Seppuku. Now you might be like, okay, those numbers are fine, but what about something that is a hybrid between the two? Let's look at the Blood Infusion late in the game. Your AR is probably going to hit around 459 with 102 blood loss, and with Seppuku, 132, meaning it's kind of worse in terms of AR than Occult, and the blood loss is not too significantly better, being less than 20 away. And so what I'm getting at is a lot of what people assume are typically Dex things, and this includes other things like assassiny things, poison, stuff like that. It is typically done better on Arcane builds, and this is different because in previous games these status effects were what you got with Dexterity builds. Bleed was a very common thing to see on Dex weapons within Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3. And anything that has an assassin feel that is not the Black Knife is probably going to be associated with Arcane. Yes, luring enemies and stealth, those are actually Occult Ashes of War. Now, Dex does have its own bizarre thing going on, so it is still definitely viable, and I do plan on covering that in an upcoming video. Arcane just covers these niches much better than Dexterity does, and it does kind of push Dexterity to a different category. Now let's get to the actual design, like what actually makes it weird? Well, it's a status effects as well as even Occult. Occult is fantastic. It helps make some physical things that you cannot usually build on Arcane build much better. And if you really want to go for that damage and you want to go for that base damage and not the bleed, you could put on Crackblade, making it effectively a pseudo strength or pseudo Dex build. You just cannot infuse the Ashes of War. But the real meat and potatoes come within the status effects. It's weird and bizarre because unlike any previous game, status effects are boosted by a stat, and that's Arcane. And it's weird. Honestly, it is. It makes it proc faster, be it from bleed, poison, or even sleep and madness. And this includes incantations. And that kind of gets overpowered in some situations, especially when they first released the game. But I mean, come on, they must have some sort of limitation. And yes, they have limitations. They're the only stat without an elemental infusion on their weapons. And they can't normally use greases, right? Well, here's the thing, Arcane is the only stat that effectively breaks its own rules and the rules of the game. While it may be only a few limited options, it has weapons that can actually use greases. The Rippled Halberd and the Rippled Crescent Blade, both of which have low base damage, but they scale incredibly well with Arcane. And they enhance the greases you put on them to insane levels, kind of making it oppressive to fight in PvP. Because you get hit once or twice by the Rippled Blade when somebody has the sleep grease on it and you are going to be out. And this sets you up for some one-shot combos, and this kind of ignores the iframes, making it very frustrating to deal with, and yes, it scales incredibly high. So while it may seem like they're only limited to a few options like the Blood Flame, Somber Weapons, Occult, Poison, and Bleed Affinity, they got much more going on. And this status effect is why Arcane builds are great at attacking fast, because it is more preferable to stack these effects, and they can be stacked even when you're rolling in PvP. And it doesn't just stop with the weapons. It also includes incantations, and this part genuinely bothers me. How do I explain it? Faith doesn't have the best seal in the game. The best seal, by far, is a Dragon Communion seal, and it requires the lowest stat investment to get to these incredibly high numbers. And while there's only a few incantations that have a arcane requirement, those being Blood Flame and Dragon Sacrifice or Dragon Communion, those are some of the best incantations and the best effects in the game, and the low requirements make them even better. So do you remember how I mentioned earlier it does not have any weapon infusions, so it wouldn't necessarily have any elemental infusions, right? Well, that's because it doesn't need it, because the Dragon Breaths do cover these damage differences pretty well. Hell, any other low requirement incantation still does fantastic with Arcane just because of their high scaling. These incants are ridiculously powerful and can cheese entire fights. And both the damage as well as the application of the status effects scale with Arcane. And yes, it has the highest incant scaling in the game, at least when you're looking at reasonable investment levels. Yes, other seals can surpass it, but the investment is so high, you're gonna have to hit like level 200 to reasonably use them at that level, and that is with crippling your other stats. And it doesn't even stop there. It does not even stop with the incantations. It even goes to sorceries, because the Albinaric Staff, another staff that has low requirements, and yes, you're probably not going to be building a lot of intelligence with this, it still gives you the access to sorceries, like Glintstone Pebble, and that's already quite a bit. It is not quite as powerful as the incants are given, but it gives it some unnecessary power and unnecessary options that other builds aren't allocated. And it hardly even seems fitting, because there are no arcane required incantations in the game. But the true nail in the coffin on the overall theme of Arcane is that it is not consistent. Most stats are kind of simple and easy to find. You got stats that can be clarified as simple gravity and glintstone, fire and force, calling upon a higher power, lightning and flashing maneuver. But Arcane isn't just assassin and edge, but also bleed, decay, dragon, poison, madness, and poorly defined powers so vague yet so powerful. Arcane is very similar to Dex in a way in which it does not seem like it has a sense of direction or complete direction, but unlike Dex, it is oversaturated, while Dex is very much undersaturated with power. So just to cover up the reasons on why it's kind of bizarre, it is simple. Arcane follows different rules than everything else in the game, and it covers so much in the game. It almost does what other stats do, but better, and it uproots an entire stat from the game and pushes it somewhere else, into a limbo state, affecting other stats. And while the niche of Arcane remains all over the place, it still confuses new players because they don't know how it works. Thank you guys for watching this far into the video. If you guys please could consider liking and subscribing, that would be greatly appreciated. This is a new channel, so any help you could offer would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, have an awesome day.